Welcome to the University of Rivengard, where we're teaching you the ins and outs of Snow Prince Rivengard, so you can have the best possible start to your game experience. We is me. I'm Erroneous. Alright, so let's talk terrain. On a battleground, terrain is the ground that the battle takes place on, and in Rivengard, that's hugely important. There's all sorts of different types of ground and modifiers on that ground. That terrain will make or break your battle experience. Now, you start off with normal. Normal terrain is, well, it's normal terrain. It doesn't look like anything. It looks like background. It's supposed to look like that because it tells you it's normal. Except that normal terrain often isn't normal. Normal terrain can have modifiers on it. The biggest one of those is elevation. In Rivengard, combat takes place in 3 dimensions, and that means you can take the high ground. You should always take the high ground. Star Wars, if it taught us anything, it's you take the high ground, because if you take the high ground, what can they do? It's the high ground, right? The high ground gives you an advantage in damage. In Rivengard, if you have the high ground and you're hitting or shooting down at an opponent, you're doing an extra 50% damage to them. Now, there can be multiple levels of terrain, multiple levels of elevation. You only ever get the higher ground 50%. But it can make a huge difference when you want to move, or if you're going to try and shoot in different elevations. If you're trying to attack an adjacent square, well, it's not adjacent unless it's within 1 level of elevation. If you're 2 up or 3 up as it's going up kind of a mountain, you're going to look down and you're not going to be able to hit them, or you're going to look up and you're not going to be able to hit them unless you've got a ranged attack. It's pretty cool, actually. It works really, really well on some maps, and you gotta pay attention to it, or it can really mess you up. Now, some characters don't move up and down hills very well because they're big, they're hulking. We're not gonna make any judgments on their diet or their physical condition, but we are gonna be conscious of that if we're trying to move around the map. There are more modifiers that can be applied to these normal terrains. These modifiers will sometimes be ignored by certain characters. Certain characters get extra advantages on certain types of terrain. You're going to have to actually look at your character sheet. You're going to have to look at the specific hero to find out if there's something unique for that. Sometimes an entire color gets a benefit from it. Like in the case of ice. Ice is cold. It makes people stop and shiver. Unless they're blue heroes, in which case they just completely ignore it. Ice will melt. Ice goes away after 4 turns. Opposite of ice, we got fire. Fire also, you stop, because it's fire. There are certain kinds of terrain, and I'll get to it later, that fire can spread through. But the most important thing to remember is if you start your turn in fire, fire hurts. Fire will do 20% of your maximum health of that hero in damage at the beginning of each turn that they're on fire. Okay? Maximum health means the health that you started with. So if you started with 1,000 health, it will do 200 damage to you every turn. If you started with 100 health, 20 damage to you every turn. So 5 turns, dead. Which, I guess it's fortunate that fire also goes away after 4 turns. Darkness. Darkness is purple. So this purple darkness that kind of wavies around, it will stop you. Because darkness, I don't know, is scary. We can't move through it very well. We can't see. And because we can't see, that hero can only target adjacent tiles. So only tiles that are touching the tile that they're on. Because, well, they can't see that good. That means ranged characters are a huge disadvantage if they're in darkness. Right? Darkness brightens up and fluffs away after 4 turns. What doesn't go away after 4 turns are webs, because they go away after 2 turns, which is nice. Webs don't affect green heroes, but everyone else, it's super annoying. It stops you. And then when you move off of them, you can only move 1 square because you're all like, I got webs all over me and it's gross and it's, They go away. So the next character that came through after you've ripped all these webs off is fine. But for the time that you're in that web, plus 25% damage to you. Like I said, they'll melt away after 2. The last one that could modify normal terrain as of the recording of this video is what's called a polearm zone of control. Certain heroes have pole arms, and these pole arms will stop other heroes from moving through, other characters, other enemies from moving through their zone of control. So an adjacent square to that hero, an adjacent hex to that hero, cannot be moved in and out of. You just stop and you get to it, right? So that's our modifiers. And just a quick note on stopping. Heroes that are mounted as a trait of that hero, heroes that are flying, heroes that are burrowing, they are not affected by these things that say stop. They just ride over them or fly over them or burrow under them. And that's part of what makes them cool, I guess. Thorns. If we're looking at the map, you could see thorns, and thorns will stop you, but it's not considered normal terrain. It's its own terrain. These thorns, when you're in them, you will take 50% extra damage. Opposite of thorns, you've got shrubs. Shrubs won't stop you. You can move through them, and while you're hidden in these shrubs, you take 50% less damage. Certain characters can get even better protection from shrubs. They can get concealment. And these stealthy characters might not be able to be targeted when they're in shrubs, or they might have a chance to evade damage entirely. Kind of like shrubs, but drier, are dry bushes. I remember when I talked about fire earlier? Fire spreads in dry bushes, and I can vouch for this. One little fire tile can very quickly become a forest fire that stops you from doing a whole lot of things moving through. It can really play havoc with the team's health. Thorns, shrubs, dry bushes, you're gonna run into these all, and they'll give you advantages and disadvantages depending on whether you're the one in them or you're the one attacking them. You can run into broken ice. Broken ice kind of floats there, and you can pass it, you can move on it, you stop. Unless you're mounted, you stop on the broken ice, and then as you move off, it breaks up and goes away. That can be really frustrating, or it can be a great thing. You can use it to your advantage if you're busting through it and then sticking your opponent's melee unit on the other side of a river while you pelt them with magical bolts or arrows or what have you. 2 more things. 2 more terrain types that I want to hit that really they're not so much a kind of terrain as a thing that's on or in terrain. The first is a wormhole, and we're not talking Star Trek, but we sort of are. In a desert terrain, you might find something that looks like a whirlpool of sand. Somewhere else on that map is going to be another whirlpool of sand. Sometimes it can be hard to see because it starts underneath an enemy, but it's there. For the purposes of movement, those wormholes are considered next to each other. You can't shoot through them like that, but if you've got a movement rating of 3, you move onto a wormhole, that's 1. You move all the way to the other side of the map to another wormhole, that's 2, and then you can move 1 more off of that. Your opponent can do the same thing, so you gotta watch out for it. Sometimes you want to park someone just on top of your side of the wormhole so that nobody can move through. Lastly is the good one, the healing tile. And you'll see this, and probably about quarter to a third of the maps that you're on will have a healing tile. Some of them will have 2. And if you start your turn on the healing tile, so it doesn't benefit you moving on to it, but if you start your turn on a healing tile, you will get 35% of your maximum health, your starting health, returned to you. You can't go over 100% health, but if you start with 1,000 health, each time you're starting a turn on that healing tile, you gain 350 health. If you have 100 health, you gain 35 health. This applies to your enemies too. This can be really useful when you're doing a quest that requires you to heal a whole bunch, or a quest that requires you to do a lot of damage, because if you're clever, you can park your opponent on a healing tile and do just enough damage to keep them alive, while they just pelt ineffectually back at you. Terrain is one of the key things, one of the lifeblood understandings of Rivengard combat. And if you understand what's going on your map, you can plan, you can take advantage of things, you can pull off some really sweet victories that really shouldn't have been possible. Just for the first little bit, when you're looking at a map, just study the terrain. Where can I move? Where can I not move? Look at the enemies. What are they going to do? How can they modify the tiles? How can I modify the tiles to my advantage? It's maybe not as complicated as I'm making it sound, but like I said, it's important. So I'm Erroneous. I hope that through this University of Rivengard tutorial on Rivengard terrain, your Rivengard combat can get leveled up a step better, and it's just a little bit less confusing for you when something goes terribly, horribly, and very predictably wrong.